Hello everyone, a warm welcome to one and all. A very warm welcome to you, James, and a
Thank you.
big namaste to everyone. Today, James is going to talk to us about a favorite topic of ours, transit, and the transit of Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus. It's said because we all are so very concerned every time there's a transit into our first house, second house, third house. It is something that really concerns us. So, James, thank you for being so nice to talk on this one of this very much loved topic of transit into different houses.
Okay. And the reason that we're talking about transits today is because my book on transits that I wrote many years ago, How to Predict Your Future, Secrets of Eastern and Western Astrology, this is now on ebook. It's now on the ebook. And the book it's Western transits through the houses.
Right.
And there's a whole section on dashas and bhuktis. So it's secrets of Eastern and Western astrology. But it goes through the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, through all 12 houses.
Okay.
And then it takes the same planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, in their transiting aspects. Uranus conjunct the Sun, Uranus conjunct the Moon, Saturn conjunct Jupiter, Saturn conjunct Mercury. It's in the ebook form, it's 900 pages. It's a big book, but it is out now. So if they want to buy the book, the best place to buy the ebook, what helps me the most, is if they buy the book at store.bookbaby.com. So that's the address. You can buy ebooks anywhere, but the best place to buy it is store.bookbaby.com. That would be best.
www.store.bookbaby.com. That's the address, and you will be finding it right there and in the link also.
It's How to Predict Your Future, and it's both Western and Eastern. It's got a lot of material in there. Okay, so I wanted to speak, Jupiter is about to enter Sagittarius, so this is going to change people's lives. This is interesting for me because Saturn has been in my 8th house. I have a Taurus ascendant. Saturn has been in my 8th house for 2 years, and I was stuck paying lawyers because we got a frivolous lawsuit after my brother died 2.5 years ago. His stepson, it was just crazy. It was a frivolous lawsuit, but it cost us a fortune. That's while Saturn was transiting my 8th house. Jupiter is now just getting ready to go into the 8th house. And suddenly, about a month or two ago, water began leaking in my kitchen. I said, what the hell is this? So finally we found the water leak, and now the insurance company, 8th house, has to pay for it. So I will get a new kitchen because of the leaking. And so that's Jupiter going through the 8th house by transit. So this is how it works. Also, the 8th house is astrology and metaphysics, and I'm working on my workshop for Sedona. There's going to be a Vedic Astrology conference every year in Sedona, Arizona. And this year, for the first time in 15 years, I'm going. And I'm working on the conference now. Jupiter getting into the 8th house, even though it's a few weeks early, I almost always feel these transits 3-4 weeks early. Suddenly, ideas, I've been thinking about the conference all year long and taking notes of what I want to say. Suddenly, in the last week or two, all these really important thoughts have been coming because Jupiter is now transiting the 8th house. So, we'll talk about, this is, nothing complicated. It's simple information, simple knowledge. It's common sense, but I'll talk about Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus. So Jupiter is basically a planet of luck. But you have to be careful with Jupiter because it's luck, but you cannot go overboard thinking, oh, this is going to be fantastic, because it's not necessarily fantastic, but it definitely smooths the way and paves the way. So Jupiter going through the 1st house,
Right.
or anybody who has Sagittarius ascendant, Jupiter going through the first house, the person's confidence begins to rise. They become open to promotions, the public favoring them, people liking them, luck occurring. If bad things happen while Jupiter's transiting the first house, it can be okay. About 8 years ago, I fell off a ladder, and I thought, when I hit the ground, I thought I was going to be in a hospital or paralyzed. It was that bad. I wasn't. I didn't get a concussion, as bad as it was. And I thought, how did I escape this? And on the day that I fell, Jupiter was actually right on the ascendant. It's bizarre that I should have fallen while Jupiter was on the ascendant, but I did have very nasty transits going on at the time. Anyway, when Jupiter goes through your first house, you are lucky, people favor you. That's basically it. Now, if you're using the Hindu system, then of course, Jupiter will be aspecting the 7th house, which is really good for relationships during that year. Jupiter will be aspecting the 5th house, which is good for your children. Jupiter in the 9th house, which is good for travel and such. But mainly, Jupiter through the first house, more than anything, is confidence rising, promotions, and good for all relationships. Now, when Saturn goes into the first house, it's of course more difficult and more tedious. And I have to preface this. Hindu astrology, Vedic astrology, is very simple. You have good planets and bad planets. So I'll be talking about Saturn to a client, and the client will insist on letting me know, I like Saturn. Saturn's my friend. That's great that Saturn's your friend. Saturn's my best planet. It's my Raja Yoga Karaka. Doesn't matter. When Saturn transits a house or aspects a planet, there must be restriction and obstacles and delays. There can also be some good karma, because Saturn is a planet of karma. And if it's going through a house that is particularly strong, you may get some good results from that. But essentially, Saturn transiting the first house means those 2.5 years are going to be about working on your flaws. Suddenly your energy goes inward and you start to see the things that you're doing wrong. You start to see your flaws, and the world begins to be critical. People begin criticizing you. The luck is not so strong. So and the confidence gets weaker when Saturn's through the first house. That's generally how it works. Now, I also and relationships as well. This is not a good time for marriage and relationships, because when Saturn's in the first house, it's aspecting the 7th.
Yes.
So it's not, and it's aspecting the 10th, which is career. It's a difficult transit for most people. I do want to mention that if you're using Hindu Vedic astrology, you want to look at the Ashtaka Varga system. The computers will tell you there's a point system. So the average number of points, it's a long calculation, but the computer does it for you. So when you go to the Ashtaka Varga, if your first house has only 18 or 19 points, yeah, Jupiter's transit through the first is not going to be nearly as good. If Saturn goes through the first house, it's going to be worse than usual. On the other hand, if you have 35 or 37 points, really high, then Jupiter's transit through the first will be extra good. Saturn's transit through the first will still be rough, but it will also bring some positive energy as well. That's how the Ashtaka Varga generally works. So in those 2.5 years, it's more of a building period, not a period of getting lots of rewards and such. It's not a good time for promotions. When Uranus transits the first house, first of all, when Uranus hits the ascendant, when it enters that first house, the exact ascendant, big changes occur. Big changes. Astrologers often rectify horoscopes when Uranus hits the ascendant. When either Jupiter or Uranus hits the ascendant, that's also the time when a person will come for an astrology reading. But that's just the one little period when it hits. Uranus going through the first house will be about 7 years. And during that transit, a person becomes impatient, they become restless, they become completely independent. They no longer care what other people think so much, and the person does whatever he or she wants to do. Before that time, the person may be thinking, what do they think? What do they think? I have to do what everybody thinks. But when Uranus transits the first house, the person becomes independent, free thinking. They also become stubborn. They want to do what they want to do. Okay? It's an extremely creative period. It's a great period for astrology and metaphysical subjects and things like that. It's not so good when Uranus transits the first house. It's not the best for relationships with anybody. It's not bad for relationships, but when the person has Uranus transiting the first house, they begin to be independent. And other people, lovers, marriage partners, children, they wonder, why have you changed? Why are you behaving so independently? Why are you doing what you want to do and not caring about me? So it becomes a little bit difficult for that, a little bit. But mainly it means the person's extremely creative and doing things they've always wanted to do before, like that. The second house is money. So when Jupiter goes through the money house, generally for a year, 12 months, money increases, money gets better. In the Western system, the second house also has to do with the person's self-value. The second house is money and values. So money gets better for that year. Money comes in easier. And they start to feel that they are more valuable, like that. In the Hindu system, that Jupiter through the second house would be extremely good for education and knowledge and writing and teaching. That's more of a Hindu thing. When Saturn goes into the second house, for 2.5 years, you will wake up every morning thinking about my money. How much money am I making? How much money do I need to make? What am I going to do to make that money? Everything is about money. Okay. Now, in 80%, I would say, it's just a guess, 70 or 80% of the cases, when Saturn goes through the second house, money dries up. It gets more difficult. There's about 20 or 30% of the people, which is not a lot, so it's not worth saying it for most people, because astrology is only about 70% accurate anyway, for the most part, because it's way too complex. But in about 20 or 30% of the cases, the person will make more money than ever. Usually that's because the chart is very strong for money, or it's because the person has been very responsible. When I say responsible about money, what I mean is they have thought about money. They have, like a friend of mine, when he was a teacher or something, and he realized, this is not going to work. This life is not going to work. I don't have it. How do I have to make money? And he went to someone who was very, very wealthy. He said, how do I do it? He said, go to law school, you get the law degree, you go to this particular firm, and you're going to make money. He did that, and he became wealthy. So he was responsible about that. So when Saturn transits his second house, he'd be the kind of person where he could make more money than ever. Most people, honestly, they do what they love to do, they do what they want to do, and money is secondary. And when Saturn transits their second house, money becomes difficult. Okay? Now in India, the Indians that I do charts for, they are very concerned with money. So when Saturn transits their second house, it's not as bad because they've been focusing on it a lot. Yeah.
And they've been planning, administrating what they want to do about it and things like that.
Yeah. So when Uranus enters the second house by transit for 7 years, money becomes volatile. Money goes up and down. Now, that can be way up and it can be way down. And the person begins to approach money. They begin to approach money from the point of view of excitement. So that's when they're willing to speculate. Even though the fifth house is gambling and speculations, when Uranus is in the second house, the person is not so conservative about it. I was born with Uranus in my second house. So my money fluctuates a lot. And I've always been like, oh, maybe we could make a lot here. It's always been like that. You know, so I invest in gold and silver, which are things that are very volatile. That's very comfortable for me. Taking a big risk is comfortable for me with money because Uranus is in the second house. It doesn't mean I'll always make money, but the idea is always there that I could make a lot. You know, it could go up and down. The self-value can also go up and down. I can think, oh, I'm really great and I'm worth a lot, you know, as a person. And then it can also go the other way as well. If you're doing Indian Vedic astrology, then Uranus through the second house could be good for knowledge and information and things like that. But it's basically about money going up and down, and it's basically about the attitude toward money changes dramatically. Suddenly you feel like, hey, it's possible for me to do something speculative and make a lot, like that. Now, if these planets in the first house or second house, if they conjunct a planet, if Saturn's going through the second house and suddenly it hits Jupiter or Mercury or the sun, especially for that period where Saturn is within 1 degree of that planet, that's when the money will really dry up or become difficult. If Jupiter's going through the second house and it hits a planet within 1 degree on either side, so say you've got Mars in the second house at 10 degrees. When Jupiter gets to 9 degrees, 10 degrees, 11 degrees, that's the conjunction. At that point, the money will increase because it's Jupiter. If Saturn hits that planet, at that time, it goes down. So that's explained in the book. Now, the third house is brothers and sisters and the ability to get your desires fulfilled. In the Western system, the third house is the mind and teaching, okay? So I'll talk about this both ways. So when Jupiter gets in the third house, the first thing that happens is you're likely to have good results with brothers and sisters. That's the first thing.
Right.
The next thing is your energy increases. And when you go to try to accomplish something, you fulfill it easily. It's not so hard to do. It's also, that'll be a good year for brothers and sisters. For neighbors, as well as brothers and sisters. You may get along well with your neighbors when Jupiter transits the third house. And the energy level is very strong. So that's very nice. And from the Western point of view, the mind gets optimistic and, writing and teaching is good. When Saturn is transiting the third house, the energy level gets weak and the ability to accomplish what you want to accomplish gets more difficult. You feel like you're plowing through mud. You feel like you're pushing uphill. So if normally when you're doing your work, every year you do a certain kind of effort and you get a certain kind of results, when Saturn enters that third house for 2.5 years, the results that you get cut in half. They just cut in half. And you wonder, I'm not doing anything wrong. Why am I not getting the results? Saturn wants you to focus more and concentrate more and work harder so that when the transit is over, for the next 29 years, when you're doing your work and concentrating and focusing, you'll actually get better results because you've learned how to focus and concentrate. But during those 2.5 years, it's very difficult. People feel tired. They feel like they don't know why they can't make things happen like that. It's also rough on the brothers and sisters and the neighbors and all of that stuff. From the Western point of view, it actually is not so good for the peace of mind, but this is different from Hindu. Hindu, the fifth house is the mind. But even if you're using the Hindu chart, Saturn going through that third house can make a person a little bit depressed or heavy in their thinking. When Uranus goes into the third house, it's fantastic for the mind, for creativity, for writing, for teaching. It's very, very fascinating for that. It opens up the mind to see things that weren't there before. It's really good for astrology and metaphysics and things like that. Now, of course, it means that you may have strange or weird or volatile experiences with siblings. It's not generally dangerous to siblings. If Neptune goes into the third house, siblings start to get ill or sick, but that's a different planet. Uranus is not dangerous. It just means that your brothers and sisters may act weird or bizarre or things like that. But it's really, really stimulating to the mind and the writing and teaching process and things like that. So that's very nice. In the fourth house, when Jupiter goes into the fourth house, luck with mother, luck with land, homes, and real estate, and cars, happiness in the heart. This is a wonderful transit, Jupiter, through the fourth. Now remember, Jupiter is like Santa Claus. It promises a lot, but it doesn't always deliver everything you think it's going to deliver. But it's generally a really nice transit because there's happiness in the heart, happiness with mother. That's when a person is likely to move. That's when they may move. And of course, you want to look, is Jupiter transiting the fourth house from the moon or aspecting the fourth house from the moon at the same time? That would make moving even better. But moving, getting a new home, selling a home, buying a home, you want to look for the Jupiter in the fourth house, you know, things like that. And it's a wonderful transit because Jupiter in the Hindu system, Jupiter in the fourth aspects the 10th, which is very, very nice. Career. Now, the Saturn in the fourth house is a very tedious transit. It's a very tedious transit because from the Hindu point of view, aside from it stifles the heart, it restricts the heart emotionally and physically. If there is a person who has heart problems in their family, they're older, Saturn going through the fourth house is very bad for the heart. Now, that's a Hindu explanation. From the Western side, the fourth is the stomach and the fifth is the heart. But from the Hindu side, the Saturn in the fourth is very bad for the heart. But Saturn in the fourth house is when it's very difficult to buy a home or sell a home. If you go to move, you're not going to find what you want. If you go to sell a house, it's hard. If you go to buy a house, the price is too high. It's just difficult on that realm. That's a time when your mother may be challenging. She may need your help. You may have responsibilities with your mother, you know, things like that. It's just not a real happy transit. Now, if your fourth house is very strong and you're set up for real estate, it's possible that you could do something big with real estate. But generally, land, homes, and cars are the most restricted during that transit. From the Hindu side, it's really rough because Saturn in the fourth aspects the first, which is the personality, the 10th, which is career, and the 6th, which is the job. So I tell people when Saturn's transiting the fourth house, just build a base. Don't look for rewards. Work hard, build a base. When Saturn leaves the fourth house, then you can get the promotions and things, or the accolades or the results of your work. Uranus through the fourth house is a fascinating transit. First of all, it's a very strong likelihood of moving. Okay? Excitement for 7 years. People may move more often than usual when Uranus is in the fourth house because it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. So that's a good time for moving around, buying and selling, flipping homes, etc. It can mean that your mother begins to act strange or weird or things like that. One of the most fascinating things, this is a Western explanation, one of the most fascinating things about the fourth house in the Western system is that it represents your ancestors and what your ancestors have given you. So you grow up and you know you're being guided by your parents, and they're really putting a whole system on you of who you are and how life should be, etc., etc. When Uranus gets into that house, you suddenly wake up and you go, wait a minute. The way I behave in relation to religion, the way I behave in relation to money, the way I behave in relation to anything, you suddenly start to wonder, did I ever decide that it should be that way? My ancestors gave me that. Okay? Because the fourth house is the ancestors. So during that 7 years, you begin to question what was laid on you. And then you can begin to change those things. And you say, you know what, those are my father's values. I don't want those. But, you know, so every time Uranus does that, that's what that transit is.
Okay. James, I'd like to ask you just one question here. When you are talking about the Hindu system, the Western system, in the Western system, the aspects are different. You don't take 159, you take a different set of.
This is fascinating. When we do transits, we look at transits, so Jupiter will be in the fourth house, maybe there's a planet in the fourth house like Mercury. Jupiter comes and conjuncts that planet. And we talk about that. So if Mercury's 15 degrees, when Jupiter's 14, 15, 16, we give a whole explanation of what that means. That's the biggest part of the book is that those kind of aspects, those conjunctions and such. And then when Jupiter maybe is in the fourth house and it throws a trine, okay, onto a planet. Yeah. So it aspects a planet in the 12th house. And we talk about, let's say the moon is in the 12th house and it's throwing, so we only talk about if the moon is 15 degrees, when Jupiter's in the fourth house at 14, 15, 16, it aspects that moon, it throws a trine, and this is what it means. That's what the book is going on about, those transits. Okay. What we don't do in the Western system, and this was really surprising to me when I got to India, Jupiter aspects the 5th, the 7th, and the 9th. Whatever house it's in, we look at the houses it aspects. If Saturn's in the 3rd, it aspects the 9th in the transit. We don't do that in the Western. We only do Saturn's in the 3rd house, and when it gets within 1, 2, 3 degrees of a planet in the 9th, opposing it, we look at that. So it lasts for a week or two or a month or two, and that's it. We don't say, oh, the whole time it's aspecting, you know, we don't say that. So it's a little bit different, and that's all explained in the book. So in the 5th house, Jupiter in the 5th house, I always tell people, I always use the same phrase. I say when Jupiter's transiting the 5th house, as long as Saturn's not transiting the 5th at the same time or aspecting it, I tell them this will be the most creative, optimistic, creative year in the whole 12-year cycle. Now, of course, if you're in a terrible dasha bhukti, period, subperiod, it's not going to be so great. But we're just isolating these things in isolation. When Jupiter transits the 5th house, I always talk about this because my first wife, when I was 25 or 26, she taught me guitar. And I was playing guitar and learning guitar and singing Beatles songs. And Jupiter got into my 5th house, and I started writing songs. I wrote about 7 or 8 songs. It was not easy, but I wrote about 7 or 8 songs. I didn't write, after that was over, I didn't write for ages. But when Jupiter gets into the 5th house, there's a creativity that's not there during the other years. It just opens up the mind. From the Hindu system, it opens up the mind. From the Western system, the 5th house is the arts. So it becomes very artistic. But it's a wonderful, it's great for investments and speculations. It's great for children. You know, it's great for mental optimism. When Jupiter's in the 4th, the heart is happy. When Jupiter's in the 5th, the mind is happy, like that. When Saturn gets into the 5th house, I tell people, look, you're going to find that life is not so much fun, because the 5th house is fun. And at first, it'll be very slow. They'll start to not go to the movies so much. They'll start to not go play sports. They'll start to not, slowly, till by the end of a year or two, they're not doing anything fun. Okay? So I tell them, look, in the next 2.5 years, you have to You have to say, you have to keep Friday night as movie night or something, or sports night, something, because otherwise those 2.5 years, they become depressing. They become depressing to the mind. That's when you will have responsibilities with children. So if a person has children that are difficult, children that are taking drugs or causing problems, if they're already causing problems, when Saturn enters that fifth house, it's going to be worse. And whether it's good children or bad children, when Saturn gets into that fifth house for those 2.5 years, you are going to have to take care of your children. You're going to have to more responsibility. Your focus will be on them, much more than usual, much more. That's where, and investments and speculations, they're not so good when Saturn transits the fifth house, usually.
I'd like to just ask one question more here, because this is going to be a very recent transit later. Because we will see after Saturn moves into Capricorn, a year later, Jupiter will be joining Saturn in Capricorn. And Barack Obama also has it, albeit both retrograde. And that's on his Lagna. So, but that's in that particular year, as you said, for Virgo Lagna. Okay.
Yeah, let me explain. So I've been for the last 12 months, when I do readings, I talk about the dashas, the bhuktis. I talk about the transits of Jupiter and Saturn for the next 3 or 4 years. So everybody that I do a reading for now, this is what I say. Okay, let's say that Saturn is going to be transiting Capricorn 2020, 21, 22 in their fourth house, aspecting their 10th. So this is what I say. 2020, 21, 22, Saturn's going to be in your fourth house, causing problems with mother, happiness, cars, and homes. It'll be causing troubles with career. Now, when I say this, you're not going to get all of these troubles, and they may not be huge troubles, but that's where the pressure will be. I explain that. Then I say this. Within those 3 years, 2020, 21, 22, there will be 12 months when Jupiter will come in and neutralize Saturn so that you can do things with home and land and cars and mother and career. But in the case that's coming up, this Jupiter with Saturn, it's separated into 3 parts. Jupiter will be in Capricorn with Saturn April, May, June 2020,
Right.
November 2020 to April 2021, and then September, October, November 2021. So Jupiter's not going to be with Saturn the whole year. It's going to be 3 months, April, May, June, then November of 2020 to April 2020, 6 months, and then September, October, November 2021, 3 months. So it's three different times when you can finally do something in that area without trouble. So when like Jupiter's going to go into Sag and be with Saturn for 3 months, November, December, January. Jupiter will stay and Saturn will leave. So November, December, January, whatever troubles you've been having with Saturn and Sag, it's going to get neutralized by Jupiter. They will neutralize each other, and that house can become useful. So that's a good point.
Thank you so much. So we can move
Sure.
on to the Uranus in the fifth house. I think we did
Uranus in the fifth house. I love Uranus in the fifth house transits. I have so many people that are very creative and artistic. I get a lot of people who have the arts in their horoscope, but it's not their career. Sometimes they're getting older and they're retiring, and Uranus is going into the fifth house. And if their chart is artistic and they're retiring, I say, look, for the next 7 years, Uranus is going into the house of art. And this is going to be really a time when the arts is stimulated. So if you want to do something on the artistic level, now is the time. Now, the Jupiter in the fifth house was really good for love affairs. Love affairs doesn't mean marriage. It just means love affairs, okay, for single people. Saturn in the fifth house, bad for love affairs, okay? When it's transiting the fifth, it's not good for love affairs. When Uranus is in the fifth house, oh my God, it stimulates the love affair energy very well. So it's good. It's good for love affairs. It's good for artistic creativity. When it comes to speculations, look out, because they can go way up and way down. It doesn't particularly help. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it's volatile, like that. And with children, the children can suddenly become open to spiritual ideas. The children can suddenly become doing different things than they've ever done before. The children can act weird or strange. It's not a bad transit. It's just the children will now open up to things that are beyond what they're used to. So it's stimulating to the children. It's a nice transit that way.
As you said earlier, they become more independent. So the word independent.
For sure. Yeah, they become creative and independent, things like that. But if you have children that are hard to control in the sense that they're causing problems, that's not going to help. If you're wanting to put restrictions on them, that's going to be a difficult 7 years. Jupiter going into the sixth house, of course, is going to be good for working on your health. That's a time when it's easier to diet, easier to exercise. That's a time when you have happiness in the area of the workplace, with the bosses, with the people below you, with the people next to you. The sixth house, you must remember, there are people that work for you that are not co-workers. They are handymen, doctors, dentists, dry cleaners. Anytime you go and pay for a service, that person's working for you.
Right.
When Jupiter is going through the sixth house, the doctors will do the work well. The handyman will do the work well, okay? I had a handyman that was a real problem, but I couldn't find any other handyman, and I didn't want to go through the trouble. And this was going on for years. He was taking too long, which was costing me more. When Saturn got into that sixth house, within a month, I said, I'm getting rid of this guy. I can't take it anymore. I became responsible and I said, I've got to find a new handyman. So Jupiter going through the sixth house is really good for the workplace, anybody that works for you, things like that. It's good for, you may enjoy cooking, taking care of people. Very little chance of there being enemies and jealous people and things like that. When Saturn goes into the sixth house, so in my lifetime, I don't think I've worked for someone else more than a couple of years. When Saturn went into my sixth house, it was when I was writing my first book, and I needed to make money so I could be writing, and so I had to work a job. I worked for my brother, but I still had to go 8 to 5. It was horrible. I hated it. As soon as Saturn left the sixth house, I was done. I didn't have to work for anybody ever again. So Saturn in the sixth house makes you work harder, longer hours, more tedious, more difficult. That's generally the way that works. And Saturn through the sixth house will not cause illnesses. What it will do is it will bring out the areas that need work. So if you have an area that it's kind of like Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde comes along, and whatever problems have been sitting there that you didn't know about, they pop up. So I tell people, assuming that I don't see any stress points for health, I say, look, when Saturn's transiting your sixth house, if there are hidden illnesses or things that need work, they're going to show up. So it's basically health and work more than anything. But you could have troubles with enemies and jealous people, especially if the sixth house is weak by natally, or problems with workers and such. When Uranus goes into the sixth house, this is an extremely important transit. You better make sure that for those next 7 years you have freedom in the workplace. When Uranus going into the sixth house, oftentimes is a job change. It's often a job change. But the main thing is If you have to do routine work, it will be torture for 7 years. If you have to do what the boss tells you to do all the time, it will be torture. You need freedom and independence in the workplace at that time. Health-wise, you may have spasms.
Yes.
And health-wise, Jupiter in the fifth house, when it's in Jupiter in the sixth house, will bring you information and knowledge about health and healing. But Uranus transiting the sixth house is much better for learning. When Uranus goes into that sixth house for 7 years, you start learning about health matters that are separate from going to the doctor and drugs. You start learning about alternative methods you didn't know about, acupuncture, kidney stones. So you would learn about, if you have kidney stones, there's an herb called chanca piedra, and you take that regularly and you'll never have kidney stones again. In India, what they do, they take a banana tree, they open the banana tree, and in the center is this thick liquid in the bark. You cut it up, put it in a blender and strain it, and you drink that liquid for the kidney stones. But if you take this product called chanca piedra, which means stone breaker in Spanish, if you take that regularly, you won't get the kidney stones. This is important because I was just at this restaurant where I knew this man whose father was getting kidney stones every year. This is 5 years ago when I had a kidney stone, and I learned that the chanca would take it away. And I just went to see him the other day. I said, has your father still not had a kidney stone? He said, since he's taken that chanca, he has not had a kidney stone. And he used to get them every year. He said the doctors told him, don't drink tea, don't drink coffee, eat this, drink that, and nothing made a difference. But this product did. Anyway, so when you have Uranus transiting the sixth house, you learn about these kinds of things that you wouldn't otherwise know about. Okay? The people in the workplace, they may start acting unstable, odd, bizarre, or suddenly you could be working next to people that are highly metaphysical, psychic, metaphysical, new age workers, things like that.
This was a fun explanation, and this was a very accurate explanation, because I was timing things mentally with what James had said with my timing, and it was fitting to the T. So all of you, please take note of all that he said. But these are just the 6 houses we have covered so far, and 6 more to go. Watch out for that coming up in the next episode. Thank you so much, James, for this.
My pleasure. And look for this on the ebook.
Yes, we have so many people literally come along, thank me for having James on board, and I do pass some of them to James that you've written, and James does read the comments that comes across. So James, thank you so much once again. See you in the next one.